Welcome, everyone, to Event Exchange, a series by Gevme where we dive into deep conversations with the experts shaping the future of events.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today we are joined by Stefanie Beitien, Director at North Sky Advisory. She was previously with Worldwide Fund for Nature and has been a sustainability advocate for many years. Great to have you here, Stefanie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really like events and I even like more sustainable events, so it's perfect to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful, then this is just the right place. So let's dive right into the conversation. How would you define sustainability, and can you explain the three pillars?
Yeah, so there are different definitions out there about sustainability, but my preferred one is really to think about it as to live well today, but not at the expense of future generations. So really to stay within our planetary boundaries. And a good example, or a good tangible example, is the World Overshoot Day. It is a concept that basically describes on which day in the year we consumed all the resources from the planet that the Earth can regenerate in that year. And in the 70s, it was actually the 30th of December, and now it's the 28th of July. So we live way beyond our planetary boundaries. As for the three main pillars, it's often described as ES and G, so it stands for environmental, social, and governance factors, which basically is a framework to describe how companies manage their risk and opportunities around sustainability. The term got a little bit under scrutiny lately, but maybe also for political reasons. But the main concept of corporate sustainability is definitely here to stay. We see a lot of pressure from growing public awareness, but also from investors and from the media. So I think all companies are seriously looking into that.
Wonderful. That's a great kind of way to give us some more context as to, the concept of sustainability and what it really means to you. But let's talk about sustainability in the event space. So how does sustainability apply to the events industry?
Yeah, so I think on the one side, we already see the MNCs and government agencies really asking for more sustainable events because they do have their sustainability targets. So also the events they are organizing, they need to be sustainable. And I think that in the future, a sustainable event will become the standard. So just to keep in mind all the environmental aspects as well as social responsibility will become the norm ultimately. And you can also see it on the other side. It does help improve the business operation of the events industry. So for example, if you save electricity or if you save waste, you really save costs as well. So I think it's also a great opportunity to innovate the industry itself.
Wonderful. And let's talk a little bit about the environmental aspect. So what are some of the key aspects of reducing environmental footprint of events?
Yeah. So the big topic is really carbon, and we still want people to come. So it's not that we want people to stay at home, because the event is about meeting and coming together, but from when you see the carbon footprint of the event, there are estimates that it's around 70 to up to 90% is really travel related. And it's not necessarily only the flights, but it's also local travels and all around. So that's obviously a huge aspect. Then on waste, you have a lot of wasteful events still out there. You have a lot of single-use plastics, you have printed materials, marketing materials, merchandise and giveaway and all these that create a lot of waste, together then with food waste often through like buffets or catering. And then obviously you also have the general aspect of food. Well, I'm always saying people also need to eat at home. They don't only eat at the event. But I think as an event organizer, you can still influence the food choice by, for example, sourcing more locally or giving more vegetarian options. Maybe even as the default option. That obviously reduces your carbon footprint already. And maybe last point on the aspects is really to look into the venue where you're operating and all your suppliers as well. So what footprint they have and contribute to an event.
Wonderful. Could you describe some sustainable practices that have been successfully implemented in the events industry, and kind of what benefits have they provided?
Yeah. So I think on the waste side, there's a lot happening already. So you have a lot of food waste solutions, and hotels and venues are looking into better management. For example, you can also work more closely with your catering and F&B. Better planning, attendee planning can help to reduce food waste. That's an area. In terms of all printed materials, really there's many tech solutions like Gevme, for example, but all the digital signages, then you have like agendas that can be digital. You don't need flyers anymore. So I think tech can really help on that aspect. Also, then you have opportunities to reduce single-use plastics, especially bottles. Just really ask the attendees to bring their refillables and provide water fountains. We did that on a number of events, and maybe in the first time the people are like, but then when they come there, it's really easy for them. They appreciate that reduction of waste as well. And I think there's also the aspect around merchandising, where you really need to think, is it really necessary? Because often it ends up in the bin, because we all have so many tote bags and so many pens. So I think that's an area where we can simply reduce. When it comes to carbon, it's a bit more tricky, to be honest. So I think for the local transport, you can really think of reduction by putting the transport options together, having shuttle buses for the attendees, or look for an evening venue which is very close by, so that it's maybe in walking distance. So really think about these aspects. You can also talk about your venue, or when you search for a venue, see if they have renewable energy that is powering the venue. And one aspect, which especially here in Southeast Asia, please put your temperature at the event like really to 24, 25 degrees. I've been freezing at events here a lot, and this can really help reduce the energy needs. Just to give an example, in Singapore, the cooling demand is really 1/3 of Singapore's electricity consumption, and it's only projected to increase because also the temperatures outside are getting hotter, so this problem just increases. And by just adjusting the aircon to 24 degrees and make it a check-it-free event, for example, that will already help a lot.
Wonderful. So let's now talk a little bit about the different stakeholders at events. Let's start with the attendees, right? What role do event attendees play in promoting sustainability, and how can they be encouraged to adopt more sustainable behaviors?
Yeah, so I often think that the role of the consumer is a bit overestimated. It's often a good excuse to put the burden on the consumer. I think in general they will demand more sustainability. I think in Europe, I'm already a consumer. I get offended if there is too much waste in an event. Maybe here I'm still a little bit an outsider, but I think in Europe it's becoming quite norm that events are managed more sustainable. And I think people also can change if it's understandable and convenient for them. And one aspect is important to really underline the environmental message. It's not, oh, we want to save costs, no, but we reduce that in order to really reduce our footprint. So I think in that aspect, consumers are willing to change. One crucial aspect is really to ask them to offset their flights. I think carbon offsets are not really the solution to our climate crisis. There are many other things that are needed, but on flights is still there are not many options to reduce your footprint. You can look for more sustainable airlines and offset your flight, so at least you channel some investment into reforestation projects or renewable energy. So that's something that you can ask your attendee to do, or even as an event organizer, you can offer a whole package where their flights are already offset if needed.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Thanks for that. So how can now event organizers measure sustainability at their events, and what metrics should they use? But we understand that that also comes along with challenges. So maybe you want to touch a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you ask because the measurement is not easy. I was part of the from the Singapore Tourism Board, the Sustainability Committee, and I was at the subcommittee for measurement, and it's really not easy. So this being said, there are many tools coming up. So there are quite a number of free carbon calculators, for example, in the internet. I think also Gevme is looking into similar options and make it easier for companies to measure their carbon footprint. In general, there is also the ISO standard. It's the ISO standard for sustainable event management. It's 20121, I think it's the standard. So there companies can get certified for sustainable event management. And there is, I found a really good free platform where you can assess your event. It's called the Green Events Tool, GET. It's developed by the United Nations Environment Programme together with other partners. So there are a lot of useful resources and tools already out there that can help on that. Yeah, I think on the carbon aspect, there is a lot of confusion also around the terminology, because you have carbon neutral events, carbon positive, net zero, and I think I would always caution about the term of carbon neutrality, because it's somewhat misleading, because we still emit carbon into the atmosphere and then maybe we offset it later. I think the net zero description is a better term because it just shows the balance of I'm still emitting carbon emissions now, but then I have predefined reduction targets, and a part can still be removed from the atmosphere through offsets or through reduction in the long term, but the term is a bit better. So I think that's helpful. And lastly, on your question on the challenges, I think there are also two other aspects. One is about the boundaries of the event. So what does count as an event? Is it only like the time period of the event, or also the preparation and afterwards when dismantling, or is it on the main venue, or is it also the side venue? Does it include the hotel and so on? So where does an event start? Where does it end? And then also there is the topic of accountability. Is it the event organizer's responsibility, or is it the stand builder, the exhibitor, all the sub-suppliers, or is it so there's like the question, who is responsible for which footprint aspect. So yeah, I think these are some of the challenges.
Yeah, and these are some things that definitely need more thought into while planning events.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the regulatory aspect of it. So what are some of the most important regulatory developments that the event organizers should be aware of when they're planning their sustainable events?
Yeah, so the Singapore Tourism Board, together with SASIOS, the industry association, at least for Singapore, they just published in last December a very ambitious roadmap to become Asia Pacific's leading sustainable MICE destination. And the roadmap already foresees quite a number of measures and sub-targets, which is a great first step. They also just published recently the new standard for waste management. The standard is called WA3, and it provides guidelines for waste reduction goals for all the different stakeholders. So it includes the stand builder, like all the different stakeholders within an event. So that's a helpful guideline. Also, the National Environment Agency in Singapore, they published a 3R toolkit, like a reduction toolkit basically, which has very practical resources. All this for now, at least for Singapore, is voluntary, but we expect some mandatory measures coming up. So I think in general on sustainability, the mandatory measures are growing. We see, for example, sustainability reporting requirements becoming really mandatory, at least for listed companies all around the world. And many countries, I think over 130 countries already committed to a net zero goal by 2050. And that will obviously increase the pressure on governments, but subsequently also on businesses. And lastly, the European Union just passed a very strong directive on single-use plastics. And I think all this will also influence the event industry and how they can operate in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just a quick note for our listeners would be that all these resources and that Stefanie has just mentioned, we will be kind of tying them in the content block below, so you should find more resources in there as well for your reference. With that, let's move on to the next question. What are some of the key trends and innovations in sustainable events that you're currently excited about?
Yeah, so I think if COVID brought one positive thing is that really like the online conferences tools have improved like really rapidly. We are all used to virtual events now. As I said, it's nice still to be in person, but at least I don't have to fly to every event. So as an organizer, if I offer the in-person but also the virtual audience, first of all, I can have a much bigger reach, but I can also save on carbon footprint. Then combined with that is also that I don't need to fly in necessarily every speaker. Nowadays, it's very normal that you have an event and on the panel you have 2 or 3 people in person, but then there's another person that is zoomed in or beamed into the event. So people get used to that. So you don't have to fly a speaker all around the world. So I think these are tech innovations that really improved over the last years and can help make it more sustainable. I think in terms of the waste management, I love the concept of a circular economy. It really the idea of, don't even call it waste in the first place. Think about it as resources and that we want to keep them in the loop as long as possible. So think about all repairing, renting, sharing, all these ideas, or for stand builders, for example, to reuse certain panels, to have modular stands that you can repurpose or furniture that you reuse, because I think still in the exhibition space especially, there's a lot just being built and thrown away just after the event. So I think there a lot can help if you change your thinking. And maybe just to give an example from a different industry, in the retail sector, they already have like green lease agreements, which are between the landlord and the tenant, which have clear, let's say, environmental improvement targets. And that could be a model maybe also for the event industry, just to make sure that all the different stakeholders work towards the same goals and have the same understanding of the values as well.
That's an interesting one. I think to wrap up, we've got one last question for you, Stefanie. Finally, what advice would you give to event organizers who are just starting to prioritize sustainability in their events?
Yeah, so I think one is certainly on training and upskilling. So for yourself as a business owner, but also for your staff, there are more and more trainings coming up. There's a certified sustainable event program. But also here, for example, STB and SASIOS are offering trainings for that new waste standard. And in Australia, there is a platform called the Sustainability Event Alliance. They also have a lot of resources and trainings online and in person to really learn those skills. So that could be one, definitely. The other area is to use some of those free resources that I mentioned, so the Green Events tool or the 3R toolkit, which is out there, and get familiar with it and just start using some of these tools to have a understanding of your footprint in the first place. And then maybe just in general, I think before skill set even comes mindset. So really to think about your own operations, look through your event with open eyes and see where you could improve things or change things. And maybe my last advice is really to talk to your peers, because sustainability is a space where you can have really the famous pre-competitive collaboration, where really different players can come together and help improve the entire industry and form new standards. And so then there's also no disadvantage anymore if you go ahead with certain things, but really have that exchange and learn about best practices and learn from each other, basically.
It's really for the bigger, better for the environment, for everyone, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great end to our conversation. This is indeed a very insightful discussion, and I'm sure there's quite a few takeaways here for our audience today. Thank you so much, Stefanie, for joining us at Connect Spring. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much for having me, and we will share the links with the audience.
Yes, definitely.